Good morning, Crossway Church. Would you all stand and sing out together this morning? I believe in the blood of Jesus that washes white as snow. I believe that the power of the gospel still makes the broken whole. I believe that the curse of sin was broken when they rolled away that stone. I believe, I believe, I believe. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. I believe that the walls will start falling when we fall down on our knees. I believe that the lame will go walking and the blind are gonna see. I believe that the gates of hell tremble when the church begins to sing. I believe, I believe, I believe, yeah. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. See this out, church? Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, through every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, through every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Look at what the Lord has done. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no see beyond the grave. If love found my soul worth dying for, how wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's scars, victorious. My chains are gone, my debt is paid. From death to life, and grace to If heaven now owns that vacant tomb, how great is the hope that lives in you. The passion that tore through hell like a rose, the promise that rolled back death and its stone. If freedom is worth the life you raise, no, where is my sin? Where is my shame? If love paid it all to have my heart, how wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's scars, victorious. My chains are gone, my debt is paid. From death to life, grace to When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. And from death to life, I will sing your praise and the wonder of your grace. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. And from death to life, I will sing your praise and the wonder. I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. And from death to life, I will sing your praise in the wonder of your grace. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. My chains are gone, my debt is paid, from death to life and grace to grace.
Good morning. You can have a seat. Whether you're joining us online or you're here in person, we are just so glad that you are here to learn more about Jesus, to worship him, and just to celebrate everything he's doing in our lives. Oftentimes when we're up here, we get to talk about the importance of community. You've probably heard us talk a lot about it, actually, because we do believe that community, friendship is so important, especially the friendships with people who love Jesus the way that you do. And we try our best here at Crossway to not just start developing those kinds of friendships, but growing those friendships. And we do those things through small groups, through serving opportunities. You get to serve with your team and you become closer that way. Also just through our various ministries, from children, teenagers, all the way up through our newly established ministry called Oasis. And Oasis is for adults 60 years and older. And they are having an incredible adventure this week. They are all going to be getting in a bus and going to Kentucky, and they're going to be visiting the Ark Encounter. The Ark Encounter is like a life-size replication of Noah's Ark. And so while they're there, they're going to not only have the opportunity to grow their friendships, but also grow their faith. And it's just such a neat activity that they're going to be doing. And we like to see activities and things like this that grow friendships and grow faith for all ages here at Crossway. When you give to this ministry with your tithes and your offerings, you are giving to support ministries like Oasis. And so right now we are going to give our tithes and offerings, and there's people that are going to be walking around with buckets. And if you have tithes and offerings that you'd like to give this morning, you can just raise up your hand and they'll come by. If you're online joining us, or if you're here in the room, you can go to crosswaychurch.com and you can click on the Give tab and you can give securely that way. Otherwise, you can always text any amount to 84321. Will you please pray with me? God, thank you so much for your gift of friendship, for your gift of having people that cheer us on when things are going amazing, and that they're there when things are hard and they point us back to you. God, I pray for the generosity of people's tithes and offerings that enable these ministries in our church, so that friendships can continue to grow, so that people can learn more about you and deepen their faith. God, I pray for the sermon that we're about to hear, that you'll open our hearts to be willing to not just listen, but also act on what it is that you have to speak to us today through TJ. God, I pray that you'll bless everything that comes in this morning. We love you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, good morning, everybody. So good to see you here today. Before I get going, let me just tell you about something that's happening on Saturday, less than a week from today, that I'm pretty excited about, and I hope that you decide to get involved with. As many of you know, I am involved in an organization called Mission Mississippi. Mission Mississippi exists to bring together people from all over the state of Mississippi of different races and different denominations to hopefully try to promote unity and harmony and reconciliation. And practically what that means for me is I get together with a group of pastors every month in in our community, pastors of other races and other denominations, and we get together and we just spend time building friendships with one another. And as we build friendships with one another, we talk about some of the most difficult issues in our world. We talk about some issues that are so difficult that people tend to respond one of two ways. Either A, they get angry and emotional and they can't have a really good, healthy conversation because of it, or B, they tend to avoid the conversation altogether because of how polarizing the subject can be. But we land in the middle and we just talk about these things openly and honestly, candidly, but more importantly, we meet together to talk about these things and sharpen each other. We challenge each other and help each other to think about these things and act on these things in a biblical, God-honoring way. Well, one of the other things that we do when we get together is we come together to host events that happen in our community that we believe will help to promote harmony and reconciliation. And one of those events is happening this Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the City Park Pavilion. It's something that we call the Racial Harmony Picnic. It's something that, for those of you who've been around here for a while, you know that we used to do this every year. It was an annual event that we did up until COVID. And then COVID upended all that. And so what we're doing is we're getting back to it. And so I just want to tell you about it, and I want to take the opportunity to invite you to come. I know that 11 to 3 is a long chunk of time, so don't let that intimidate you. If you're only able to come for a part of it, that's fine. But just come out. We're going to have food. We're going to have fun. We're going to have games. We're going to have all kinds of stuff. There'll be stuff for the kiddos to do and all that kind of stuff. So that's this Saturday from 11 to 3 at the City Park Pavilion. We are in the... Yes, ma'am.
I got a question. Usually when we've had this picnic, it was covered dish and people would bring something.
Yeah.
Is that encouraged?
Yes, if you can bring a dessert, that'd be great. Yeah. I don't normally field questions in the middle of service, but I just did that, didn't I? That was kind of neat. We'll try it again some other time, you know. So listen, we are in the second week of a sermon series that we are doing entitled The Life of Moses. And the sermon series title kind of gives the whole thing away. What we're doing is we're taking a look at the life of Moses. Now, to be clear, we're not taking an exhaustive look at the life of Moses. If I were to do that, it would probably take like a year, and you guys would get so sick of hearing the name of Moses. Instead, really what we're doing is we're taking a look at snapshots from the life of Moses. And what we're doing is we're learning from him. We're learning from his faith. We're learning from his strengths, his weaknesses, his high points, his low points, his successes and failures, and all that kind of stuff. And last week, we kicked off the sermon series by talking about a portion of Moses' story that we really don't pay that much attention to. It's one of those parts of his story that when we're reading his story in the Bible, we tend to read by it very quickly and we don't give it a lot of thought. And I think that's unfortunate because embedded in the part of Moses' story that we talked about last week is a lesson that can change everything. I mean, it is a game-changing, powerful lesson. It can change everything about your marriage. It can change everything about your relationship with your kids. It can change everything about your relationship with your parents. It can change everything about your friendships. It can change everything about your workplace, and it can change everything about your faith. So if you missed last week, I want to encourage you to go back and watch it. You can catch it on our YouTube channel, or you can go to our website, crosswaychurch.com, and you can find it there. But today, I want to leap forward a little bit in the story of Moses and pick up on Moses' story in Exodus chapter 3. And because we're kind of leapfrogging a little bit, let me give you a little bit of background so you kind of know what's happening in Exodus chapter 3. For those of you who know the story of Moses, you know this is true. Moses was an Israelite who became the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the most powerful man in the world at the time, and Moses became his adopted grandson, which meant that Moses lived life, for the most part, as he was growing up in the lap of luxury. He was a man that was destined for power and prestige, and for a while, everything was going just fine until one day, Moses saw a cruel Egyptian taskmaster mistreating a Hebrew slave, and he decided to intervene. He went over there to try to deal with the situation, and things escalated rather quickly. He ended up hitting and killing the Egyptian. And when Pharaoh found out about what Moses had done, he became irate. He put a hit out on Moses' head and he tried to have him killed. Well, Moses wisely flees from Egypt, and he goes to a place called Midian. And while he's there, he meets his wife, they get married, they have a couple sons together. And by the time we get to Exodus chapter 3, Moses has been living in the wilderness in Midian for 40 years, and he has been shepherding his father-in-law's sheep. And that's where we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. It starts this way. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. And the reason why Moses did that was probably because there was a piece of land where he felt like it would be best to have his sheep graze and do that kind of stuff. So he takes his flock there, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And then in verse 2 we read, there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So when our story begins in Exodus chapter 3, Moses has taken his father-in-law's sheep to a place where it'll be good for them to graze. And I'm guessing for Moses, on this particular day, it was just a normal day. It was an average, ordinary day. The same basic things happened for Moses like every single day that he was out there. And there was nothing extraordinary that happened, nothing to write home to mom about. He's just simply doing what every good shepherd does. He's watching his sheep. He's watching his sheep to make sure that none of them wander too far away from the flock and get lost. He's watching his sheep to make sure that none of them get hurt. He's watching his sheep to make sure that they don't eat something that will make them sick. And he's also watching his sheep and scanning the horizon to make sure that there are no predators out there that are looking to harm his sheep. And he's just kind of doing his shepherd thing. And then all of a sudden, something rather unexpected happens. The Bible tells us that the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now, the way that I picture this happening is Moses is out there, he's watching the sheep, he's scanning the horizon, and he looks over and he sees a bush. And there's nothing extraordinary about the bush itself. The bush itself is actually rather ordinary. Moses has seen bushes like this for the last 40 years. He's seen countless, probably millions of bushes like this. But this particular bush catches his attention for two reasons. The first reason it's caught his attention is because the thing has spontaneously caught on fire. I mean, it seems like it came out of nowhere for Moses. Moses didn't start the fire. He knows that. He wasn't camping and then some sort of ember kind of caught the wind and went into the bush and caught the bush on fire. Moses wasn't smoking a cigarette and flicked a butt into the tree and the bush and it kind of caught on fire. There was no other shepherds in there. There were no other shepherds in the area that did it. The sheep didn't do it. There wasn't even a storm where the lightning came down and struck the bush. It just spontaneously was on fire. Now, the other thing that caught Moses' attention was the fact that the bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning. The leaves weren't wrinkling up and falling down. There was no smoke. There wasn't even the smell of smoke in the air. So naturally, this bush has Moses' full attention. I mean, he's amazed by what he sees, and he's a little surprised, and his surprise eventually turns to curiosity. And in the next verse we read, so Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight. I'll find out why the bush does not burn up. So Moses kind of creeps over to the bush and gets as close as he possibly can and still feels safe. And then we read, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses. So Moses sneaks up. He's sort of checking this thing out, examining what's going on. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a voice from the bush speaks to him. But not only is there a voice speaking to him from the bush, apparently, this voice knows his name and says it twice. Moses. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm guessing that right now God has Moses' undivided attention. I'm pretty sure he'd have mine, and I'm pretty sure he would have yours too, wouldn't he? Now let me kind of stop here and ask a question. Why did God do this? I mean, if God wanted to speak to Moses, there had to be a whole, almost a countless list of ways that God could have done it differently. God could have went to one of his prophets and told his prophets, listen, I want you to go seek out this guy named Moses. He's in the wilderness in Midian watching his father-in-law's sheep, and here's what he looks like, and here's the message I want you to take to him. I want you to tell him this, this, and this. And the prophet could have made his way out to where Moses was and said, look, I'm here on behalf of God. God's given me a message for you, and here's what God wants you to know. God could have done that. God could have talked to one of the priests that worked for him in the area or whatever and said, look, here's the deal. I want you to write a letter to Moses with some instructions. And so here's what I want you to write on the letter and just send it to him expedited and it'll get to him. And God could have done that. If this whole thing were to happen in our day and age, God could have sent a voicemail. He could have sent a text message. He could have sent an email. He could have sent a private message. There are so many ways that God could have communicated with Moses. Why would God do it in such a unique way? Why would he do it through an ordinary bush that spontaneously catches on fire but isn't actually burning? Why would he do that? And I think the answer to that is because he wanted to make sure he had Moses' attention. He wanted to make sure that Moses wasn't going to miss what he had to say to him. Which leads me to a lesson that I want you to pay attention to from this part of Moses' story. The lesson is this: when God gets your attention, you need to pay attention. Many of you know exactly what this is like, because just like God was trying to get Moses' attention, God still does this with people today. And many of you know exactly what this is like. You can think maybe it happened a week ago, maybe it happened a couple months ago, maybe it happened a day ago, maybe it happened this morning. And for some of you, it might happen later today or later this week or a month from now. But God still does this. God still gets people's attention. And the way that he does it is he lays things on our heart. We look around our world and we see people who are struggling, and we see people who are hurting, and issues that are wrong, and things that just aren't what they could or should be. And God sort of lays that on our heart, and we think to ourselves things like, man, somebody should pray for them, or somebody should encourage them, or somebody should do something, or somebody should help them, or somebody should do something about that. But all of us have probably experienced moments like that. Moments when God has just laid something on our heart. And here's what I want you to know. When God lays something on your heart, when he lights a fire in your heart for something or about something, you need to pay attention to that. And I'll explain why a little bit later. But just when God's trying to get your attention, pay attention. When he lays something on your heart, don't ignore it, don't dismiss it, don't downplay it. Pay attention. So God has Moses' undivided attention. So Moses responds, and he just simply says, "Here I am," which I'm guessing at this point was about all he could choke out of his mouth. Like, "Here I am. I'm here." So then God says, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." God tells Moses, listen, out of respect and reverence for who I am and who you're talking to in this place that we are together, I want you to take your sandals off and do it now. So Moses, without argument, without question, without debate, without hesitation, he immediately does what God tells him to do. He takes his sandals off, and he's standing there in bare feet. And in the next verse, God identifies himself, and he tells him, he says, "Look, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And apparently at this point, Moses understood exactly who was talking to him. Because then we're told, at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses understands exactly who's talking to him. So God, in the next verse, he continues with his message for Moses. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. And then God says, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I'm guessing, the Bible doesn't say this, but I'm guessing right about this moment, as God's saying these things, Moses in his head is going, yes, yes, God, yes, you get them. God has just told Moses, look, I've seen, I've heard, I'm concerned, I care about it, and I'm coming down to rescue. And the reason why I think this part of the speech where God gives him excites Moses is because just like God has seen and just like God has heard, Moses has also seen and heard too. Moses has watched as cruel taskmasters bludgeon people within an inch of their life for no reason other than sport. He's seen it more times than he can count. He's heard the groans and the moans of people who are being abused. He's heard the sounds that come from human beings who are literally being worked to death. Moses has seen, just like God, he's seen the starvation. He has watched as children with unbelievable potential who are completely innocent be victimized and die. And so I'm guessing at this point, he's like, yes. Finally, you see what I see, God. You hear what I hear. You care like I care, and you're going to do something. And I think that we can be kind of like Moses, can't we? I mean, we look around our world and we see hurts and struggles and difficulties and injustices. And we wonder in our minds, God, do you see? God, do you hear? Do you care? We have people whose marriages are falling apart, or people, we see people who are struggling financially, or people who are discouraged and disillusioned. We see people who are struggling with depression and anxiety. We watch as people in our world have physical ailments. We see wrongs that happen. And I think just like Moses, what happens to us sometimes is we go, God, do you see? God, do you hear? God, do you care? God, are you going to do anything to rescue the people from their situation, from their dilemma? And so I'm thinking Moses is hearing God say this, and he's thinking, finally you're going to do something. Finally you see, you hear, you care. Finally. Now it's at this point in the conversation where the whole thing takes a rather unexpected turn for Moses. God continues, and he goes, so now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So God tells Moses, here's the deal. I see, I hear, I care, I'm coming to rescue, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm sending you. Which brings me to the other part of the lesson from the beginning that I want to share with you. When God gets your attention, pay attention. And here's why. You are God's answer. You're God's answer to the dilemmas that you see. You're God's answer to the problems that you encounter in our world. God sees it just like you see it. He hears it just like you hear it. He cares like you do. And he's coming, and the way he's coming is you. You are God's answer. You're God's answer to the dilemma of the person whose marriage is falling apart. You might be God's answer to the dilemma of your marriage that's falling apart. You're God's answer to the dilemma of the person who's struggling financially. You're God's answer to the person who's discouraged. You're God's answer to the person who is far from God and has never given their life to Jesus Christ and needs Jesus more than they know. You're God's answer. You're the answer to the dilemmas. I had a buddy who used to say it this way. He used to say, a need noticed is an assignment given. When you notice a need, it's highly likely that God is giving you an assignment. Just like he was with Moses. So one of the things that I love about the story of Moses is that it's unbelievably honest. Because at this point in the story, you and I would probably expect Moses, since Moses is kind of like our hero and this big hero of the faith and this Bible guy, we would kind of expect him to go, all right, God, if that's the plan, if I'm it, let's go. When do we leave? Can I pack, or are we going to just head out right now? Like how do you want to do this? You say when, I'm your guy. You would kind of expect for Moses to do that. But Moses ends up doing what you and I oftentimes do when God gives us an assignment that feels bigger than we think it should, or that it costs us more than we want it to. He starts making excuses. He starts finding right reasons why he shouldn't do the thing that God has just told him to do. So in the next verse, Moses responds and he goes, but who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Basically, the excuse that Moses was making is this one. He's saying, look, I'm not qualified. God, I'm not qualified. I'm a nobody. And you can kind of hear the dialogue between God and Moses. And I think if we were to get a full version of this conversation, it might go like this. Moses telling God, look, you don't understand. You got the wrong guy. I'm a nobody. I'm not qualified. Look, I don't know if you've looked at my resume lately, but it is not impressive. I have been a shepherd for 40 years. God, for 40 years, I've been chasing these four-legged creatures around this dusty tract of land. For 40 years, I'm a shepherd. I'm old. And by the way, Egyptians hate shepherds. So, if you want me to go and get traction and respect, I don't think that's the way to go. I'm a shepherd. I'm old. I got nothing to offer. I don't have any connections. I don't have any power. I don't have any authority. I don't even understand the culture anymore. I'm disconnected from Egyptian culture. You're asking me to walk into a culture that I'm completely unfamiliar with. But God, if you would have asked me to do this when I was a younger guy, when I was well connected, when I had the right relationships, when I had sway and power and influence, when I knew the language really well, when I understood the culture and I was a mover and a shaker in that world, if you'd have asked me that, to do this when I was there, when I was young and ambitious and had all kinds of energy, then I would have understood it. But God, right now I'm just a really old man who is an absolute nobody. I am about as unqualified as a person can possibly get. God, surely there are much better qualified people in Egypt. Surely there's a whole bunch of other people that are better than me for this. And I wonder if you've ever been there. God gave you an assignment and you just felt like, I'm just not qualified. Surely there are better other people for this than me. Now, if you've ever felt like that, I want you to hear God's response to Moses. In the next verse, God responds, and I won't read you the whole thing because the first sentence kind of says it all. And God said, I will be with you. So Moses says, look, I'm a nobody. I'm not qualified. And you want to know how God answers? He basically says, I know. Now, some of you are thinking, well, that's not what you just read. And you would be correct. But that's what God's implying. In order to say, I'll be with you, God had to first imply, look, I know. I know you're not the most qualified. I know you're not well known. I know there are other seemingly more attractive options for me to use. I know you're nobody. Now, what's interesting to me here is what God doesn't say to Moses. He doesn't say, Moses, come on, man. Like, this sounds like a self-esteem issue. Like, there's a lot of negative self-talk you got going on here. Like, you need to stop downplaying and downselling yourself. And, part of the problem is just all this negative thinking here. You really have more to offer than you think you do. God doesn't say that. In fact, what he does is he acknowledges, yep, you're disqualified. Yep, you're a nobody. But none of that matters. And here's why. I will be with you. My friends, can I tell you something? God is not looking for extraordinary people. God isn't on the hunt for extraordinary people so he can use those extraordinary people. Now, don't get me wrong. God can and does use extraordinary people. And if you're an extraordinary person, good for you. God can use you. But God isn't searching high and low for the best and the brightest and the most qualified, the most attractive, the smartest, the best business acumen. God's not on the search for those. You know what God's looking for? God's looking for ordinary people. People like you and people like me who are willing to trust an extraordinary God. That's what he's looking for. Just regular Joes like you and me who are willing to trust an extraordinary God. Sometime when you get a chance, read through the Bible. God has a long and rich track record of using a bunch of nobodies who are disqualified to do his work in a powerful way in this world. God doesn't need you to be extraordinary. He just needs you to trust him. So, look, no matter what it is, no matter how scary it is, no matter how disqualified you may feel, none of that matters. Because God's going to go with you on the assignment that he's given you. And he is more than enough. He's more than enough. But Moses isn't convinced. So Moses decides to make another excuse. An excuse that I think you and I oftentimes make. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I say to them? What shall I tell them? Here's the excuse, and maybe you've used it before. God, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to start. So God responds to Moses' reservation, and here's what he tells him. He says, look, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And then God gives him more to say. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. And then I won't read the rest to you, but God gives him a whole bunch of other things to say to him. Here's God's response to that excuse. God says, hey, look, it's okay. It's okay if you don't know what to say. It's okay if you don't know where to start, because I'm going to tell you what to say. I'll tell you where to start. I'll tell you where to begin. And Moses, if you'll just go, if you'll just do what I told you to do, if you'll just start moving in that direction, if you'll listen closely and follow my guidance, you'll know exactly what to say, and you'll know exactly where to begin. I don't know what God's laid on your heart, but if you're worried about where to start or what to say, you don't have to worry about that, because God will tell you. He has been doing it for people of God all throughout human history, and he's not planning to stop now. What he's done for our brothers and sisters in the faith before us, he will continue to do for you. Now you would think at this point, Moses would kind of go, okay, God, I'm in. But he doesn't. He has another excuse. Moses answered and he said, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? So here's the excuse. Moses says, look, what if it doesn't work? Like, what if I get in there and I say what you say, tell me to say, and I begin where you begin, and they just don't believe me? Like, what if it just doesn't work? What if they don't follow me? What if they don't let the people go? What if they don't do? What if it doesn't work? So God responds to this excuse by giving Moses a couple of visual illustrations. I won't read it to you, I'll just tell you instead. He looks at Moses and he tells Moses, he says, look, what's that in your hand? Moses looks down at his hand and turns to God and said, well, it's a shepherd's staff. God says, yeah, go ahead and throw that on the ground for me. And Moses threw it on the ground, and when he threw it on the ground, we're told that it became a snake. Some scholars, in fact, most scholars believe that it was a cobra of some sort. And naturally after that, we're told that Moses ran from the snake, which is the only reasonable thing to do, other than kill it, for clarity. We have a guy in our church, one of the friends of mine, who recently found a baby timber rattler and decided that he wanted to relocate it. He got bit, and like half of his fingers like falling off, it looks like. It's terrible. I don't know why he did that, but that's the inappropriate response for clarity. If you're going to relocate a snake, you relocate them to hell. Okay? Or run. Two acceptable options. So Moses runs, and then God turns to Moses and he tells him, okay, Moses, I want you to go grab that snake. And I mean, this isn't in the Bible, but I think like it's at this point where Moses goes, all right, look, if you want me to go to Egypt, that's fine, but I ain't touching that snake. At least that's what I'd say. All right, look, you got me. I'm done with excuses. I'm going to go. But Moses, he obeys God, and he walks up and he grabs the snake, and it turns back into a rod. And I kind of picture God standing there waiting, seeing if Moses would understand. And when he realizes that Moses wasn't getting it, he decides to give Moses another visual illustration. He goes, okay, Moses, let me get you to do this. Stick your hand into your cloak and then pull it out for me. And Moses is thinking, man, that's just bizarre. But I mean, I just did grab a snake. All right. And he pulls it out, and his whole arm is covered in leprosy. In the ancient world, that was a death sentence. And I'm pretty sure it freaked Moses out. Perhaps he looks up towards the heavens at God, and God's like, hey, don't worry about this, I got this. Just stick it back in your cloak and pull it out again. He sticks it back in, pulls it out, completely back to normal. And God goes, do you get it? Now, what God was trying to communicate to Moses was that, Moses, it's not your job to bring about results. Results are not your job. It's mine. He wanted Moses to understand that Moses' job was to just simply do what God told him to do. And it's God's job to work out the rest. Can I tell you, friends, that one of the most freeing things you will ever learn about the Christian faith is that it's not your job to bring about certain results. It's not your job to manipulate or try to bring about certain outcomes. Outcomes are God's work. Our job is to simply do what God tells us to do, and then He handles the rest. My friend, it's not your job to fix your marriage. It may be your job, though, to ask for forgiveness or to forgive. And whether or not your marriage gets fixed, that's God's work. Results and outcomes are God's job. It may be your job to help that person who's in financial need, but you know it's not your job? To ensure that they use what you give them in a wise way. That's not your job. Outcomes are God's job. It's your job to share your faith, but it's not your job to make your friend give their life to Christ. That's God's job. I'm telling you, one of the most freeing things you may learn about the Christian faith is that outcomes are God's job, not yours. So Moses takes the lesson in, but he's got another excuse up his sleeve. And then he tells God, well, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Basically, here's the excuse that Moses makes. He says, look at me. I'm not really gifted. I don't have the gift set or the skill set to do what you just told me to do. And the thing he blames it on is his tongue, his speech. And scholars have debated it for a long time, and there's some really interesting ideas out there about what exactly Moses was referring to here. There's a lot of scholars that believe that what Moses is saying to God is, look, I stutter and I stammer. But really, when you get down to the bottom of it, what he's telling Moses, he's saying, look, I'm not gifted. Moses is telling God, I'm not gifted to do what you call me to do. Now, the reason why Moses says this is because he's bought into a lie that some of us sometimes buy into. And the lie goes like this: God will never ask me to do something that I'm not good at. Now, I want you to understand, every single one of us are gifted. God has given every single one of us gifts, things that we're good at. Some of us he's given a few, like me. Some of us he's given us a lot, like probably many of you. And he gives it to us in different measures. And we should figure out what those gifts are, and we should figure out how we can leverage those gifts and maximize them for the building of God's kingdom. But here's the thing. God may still ask you to do something you're not good at. Listen to his response to Moses here. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them... Wow, that came out of a mouth, didn't it? Are you okay? Okay, good. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? So he says, Moses, I created you. Everything about you I designed, I handmade you. I know what you can do and what you can't do. I know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. And Moses, the stuff you're not capable of, it doesn't matter. Because like I said earlier, I'm going with you. And I am literally all that you need. If you will just be available, I'll take whatever little you have, and then I'll make up the gap between that and what needs to happen. Because Moses, that's when I get the most glory. And the same thing that's true of Moses is true of you. God created you. He knows what you're capable of and not capable of. He doesn't need you to be spectacular. He needs you to be available, and he will take the gap between what you have and what needs to happen, and he'll fill it in, because that's when he gets the most glory. And I'm convinced that's why he does that all the time. Because if he didn't take us, if we were fully adequate, God would not get the glory. I love the way that Paul said it. He said, look, my strength, my strength, he's speaking on behalf of God, something God told him, my strength is made perfect in weakness. God doesn't need you to be gifted. He just needs you to trust him. He knows what he's doing. So let me ask you a question. What has God laid on your heart? What's the thing that God's telling you to do that you think to yourself, it needs to be somebody else. I'm not gifted. I'm not qualified. I don't know what to say. What if it doesn't work? What if I make it worse? What's the thing? My friends, when God's trying to get your attention, pay attention, because you're his answer. The God who doesn't make mistakes has chosen you. And you know what happens when we do this? God does what only God can do. And everybody benefits. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get on a bus with a group from our church, and I'm going to go to see the Ark Encounter with them. I'll be gone all week. I'm super stoked and I'm excited. That trip is a result of a ministry that got started not too long ago called Oasis. Oasis got started because there was a guy in our church who saw something, who got an assignment from God and went, I guess I'm God's guy. And he got up and did something about it. And God showed him what to say and where to start. And God is clearly working it out, because there's all kinds of people in our church who are growing and benefiting from it. Simply because one guy, and that's just one guy out of all of us who said, all right, God, if that's what you want me to do, I'm not going to make excuses. I'm just going to do it. So what has God laid on your heart? You have no idea how God might use you or what he might do. If Moses didn't eventually say yes here, we wouldn't be reading about much of what happens in our Bible. So whatever it is that God's put in your heart, don't make excuses, just do it. You're his answer. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you for this portion of Moses' story. Lord, I'm so grateful for the honesty in which the story was told, Lord. You didn't sugarcoat his hesitancy or his excuses. You just had the whole thing recorded in there. God, I am grateful that when you look around our world and you see the issues and the hurts and the pains and the struggles, that you see, that you hear, that you care, that you're coming to rescue. And God, I'm also grateful for the fact that your plan for rescue involves us. That you'll take us, no matter how broken and fractured we are, no matter how disqualified or no matter how ungifted we may be, no matter the uncertainty that we walk into things with, God, you'll just take us and we get to be a part of what you're doing in the world. So God, I pray for every single one of us. Lord, when there's something you want us to do, when there's assignment you want to give us, I pray that we would, when you're trying to get our attention, that we would pay attention. And that we would step in boldly into the thing that you've called us to do. And along the way, God, I pray that you would use our efforts to advance your causes and your kingdom in this world. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Before we close out, we're going to sing a song together. So would you all rise to your feet and sing out?
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. And every
Next week, join us as we continue our series through the life of Moses. And also next week, after this service, around 11:30-ish, we are going to have a farewell lunch for Colton and Kayla Key and their family. So we hope that you'll attend that next week after the second service. Church, have a great week. We love you. See you next week.